Did you ever want to be a big, evil boss character and just stomp through a dungeon, crushing heroes left and right? If that's the case, you'll want to know more about Die in the Dungeon. Die in the Dungeon is a lightweight, reverse dungeon crawler for 1 to 4 players. You control a big bad monster and work your way through a dungeon, avoiding traps and battling parties of adventurers and epic heroes. This game is all about dice. It's incredibly obvious from the aesthetic, with d4s through d20s prevalent throughout the artwork. They're in the background, they're on the characters, they are the characters, and they're pervasive throughout the game in the form of puns. Each time you play, you'll set up a scenario from the dungeon guide, which is largely built as a series of scenarios designed for a single player. The guide indicates the layout of the dungeon, which tiles and tokens to use, any special rules, and the victory condition for the scenario. You'll choose a character to play and take a set of dice, d4 through d20. Perhaps you'll be Troll o' Bones and smash puny adventurers with your club. Or maybe you're the die roller and are more likely to manipulate the situation with magic than with might. At the bottom of your board are your character's stats, and you'll assign your dice to these in order to customize your character. Your d4 is assigned to ability power. You'll earn some each turn and can spend it on one of the 6 unique abilities each character has. The d20 is assigned to time. Each turn you'll spend some, usually 1, but sometimes up to 4 or more. There's few opportunities to gain more time, and if you run out, you lose. The remaining dice are assigned to the other 4 traits: might, agility, magic, and health, however you wish. So one of these will start with a maximum of 12, one 10, one 8, and one a lowly 6. On your turn, you advance to any tile adjacent to one you've previously explored. Flip it over and resolve any effects it has. Some tiles are traps, others upgrade your stats, and some provide you with unique opportunities to gain allies and other effects. After resolving the effects of the tile, combat begins. Each tile features a party of 1 to 4 adventurers, which you will need to defeat. There's 4 classes: fighters, rogues, wizards, and clerics, and each class has both a unique trait as well as a unique effect that only occurs if there are 2 or more of them in a single combat. Combat's resolved in rounds, with the adventurers going first. If there's a fighter present, they will attack you with might. Now, the adventurers always work as a group, so they attack and defend with their total value for each stat. Add up all their might, and that's the value they'll use. After that, if there's a rogue, they'll attack in the same way, but with agility, and if there's a wizard, they'll attack with magic. The parties are often diverse, so it's pretty common to get hit with multiple attacks each round. After enduring the attack, you get to return the favor, making a single attack with either might, agility, or magic. There's lots going on in combat, with ways to modify your rolls, use abilities, and assign damage, so let's take a look at a full turn. Alright, so today I'm playing the die roller, and I'll be starting on the start tile here. I'm just beginning the first scenario, and all I need to do here is just defeat enemies and survive. Now I've set up my character already, so I've got my d4 assigned to ability power, and it's set to 1. All of the other dice start at their max value, with the d20 always on time, and I get to choose where the other 4 dice go, and I've put 12 for magic, 10 for might, 8 for agility, and 6 for health. Now I've got 6 abilities. There's 2 on my board that I can reuse, and then I've got 4 cards that I can use once per game. Additionally, I have a turn reference, and I start the game with 1 Dominion token, which will allow me to roll an additional die and add it to any of my other rolls. So to start my turn, I'm going to gain 1 ability point, so I'm going to change this d4 from 1 to 2. And now I can optionally rest, where I can exchange time for health. Obviously I just started and am at full health, so I'm not going to do that right now. Now if I want, I can use 1 ability. With my 2 ability points, I could use I Modify, Roll of Telekinesis, or Roll of Sleep. But these are all combat abilities, and I'll get a chance to do that later, so for now I'm just going to wait. So now I need to update my time die, the d20. You use 1 time every turn, so I'll change this from 20 down to 19. Now I can choose any unflipped tile that's adjacent to an area I've explored in the past. It doesn't have to be where my character is, just where I've explored previously. In this case, I'm going to choose the tile behind me. Now, this tile has a time token on it, so I get to claim that token and I can use it later to gain 3 additional time. So I pick up the tile and flip it over. This one's called Focus and says gain up to 2 ability points, and if at max already, use an ability for free instead. Now in this case I'm not at max, so I'll gain 2 ability points, bringing my total to 4, so I have plenty to use in combat later on. And we can see on the tile that there's 4 hero icons on the bottom. This is the party that I'll face, and the top corner is marked with a 1, so I'll grab the level 1 heroes shown on the tile. In this case, it's 1 of each. Now combat starts, so I'll flip my card over to the combat reference on the back. If there's multiple heroes of a single type, their special effects would take place now, but that's not the case with this fight, so we can ignore that. Each round of combat you'll have a chance to use an ability, so I'm going to use my Roll of Telekinesis, which says discard a die minion you control, add its die type to your next attack roll. So I'm going to discard this card because they're once per game. I'll reduce my ability power from 4 to 3, and I'll discard this D6 die minion, letting me add 6 to my next roll. Now onto the adventurers. If there's a fighter present, they'll attack with might. And there is one, so we add up all their might. 4 plus 2 plus 1 plus 2 for a total of 9. So now we take the lowest die that can roll a 9, which is a D10. And for this attack, they'll compare to my might stat, which is also a 10. Rolls don't hit when they tie, only when they exceed the value, but max rolls always hit. So even though this party can't exceed my defense, they can still hit me on a max roll. So let's roll this die and see what we get. Looks like they rolled a 5, which is lower than my 10 might, so they miss. Now, if there's a rogue, they'll attack again, but with agility. So we add up all the agility, 2 plus 4 plus 1 plus 2, which is also 9. So we'll roll the d10 again. And they rolled a 1. They whiffed it, it didn't work. Now if there's a wizard, we'll do it again, but with magic. There is one, so we add up their magic. 1 plus 1 plus 6 plus 2, for a total of 10. So they'll still roll the d10. This time they rolled a 10. So even though their roll is lower than my maximum of 12, because it's the highest result on that die, I get hit anyway. So because it was a magic attack, I get to choose between reducing either my magic or my health by 1. In this case, I'll reduce my health, so I'll set that to a 5. Additionally, most rolls will do something extra on a result of 10 or higher. In the case of magic, in addition to the 1 damage I took, I also lose 1 time. So I'll pick up the d20 and change it from 19 down to 18. Now, clerics don't attack. Their special power is that they always need to be defeated first in combat. So now that the adventurers have completed their attack, I can make mine. In this case, I'm going to make a magic attack. Magic is my best stat and is at 12, and if you recall from earlier, they had a defense of 10, so I'll hit on a result of either 11 or 12. Additionally, I did use that die minion, so I'll be adding 6 to this roll. So let's roll and see what I get. Look at that, I got a 12. Because that's a max roll, this would be a hit regardless, even if I hadn't used the die minion. Now normally I would get to choose an enemy to defeat, but because there's a cleric, I'll have to eliminate them first. And anytime you eliminate an enemy, you gain 1 experience, which is tracked on these tiny little dice. They're called dynamic dice. There's a spot for them on the left side of the board. And for now, I'll set it to 1 and just place it beside the board. So now it's the next round of combat. I can use an ability if I want, but this time I'm not going to. The adventurers go first, they have a fighter, and they'll attack with might. They have 4, 2, 1, a total of 7. So I'll grab the smallest die that allows me to roll 7, the d8. I'll roll the die, and this time they rolled a 1, so they miss. Now because they have a rogue, they'll attack with agility. They have 7 agility, and we'll use the d8 again. This time they rolled a 7, so I'll compare that to my own agility, which is 8, so they won't hit. They have a wizard, so they'll attack with their magic of 8. Once again they roll the d8, and this time they roll a 5, way lower than my magic of 12, so obviously they don't hit me. Once again, it's my turn to attack, and I'll attack with magic. I roll a d12, and they are defending with 8, so 9 or higher will be successful. This time I rolled a 10, so I'll eliminate another attacker, in this case, the wizard. I gain another experience, so I'll increase my dynamic die to 2. Now another round of combat begins. There's a fighter, so they attack with might. They have 6, so they'll roll a d6. And this time they rolled a 6. So even though my might is 10, I'll be hit and take 1 damage. So I can lose 1 health or 1 might. This time I'll lose might, and I'll change this die from a 10 down to a 9. They have a rogue, so they'll make an agility attack. They roll a d6, and they got a 2, so they miss. There's no longer a wizard, so they won't attack with magic, meaning it's now my turn. I'll attack again with magic, and this time they have a defense of just 2, so 3 or higher will be successful. I rolled a 7, so I eliminate one of them. I'm going to choose the fighter, and I gain 1 more experience on my dynamic die. Now all that's left is the rogue. They won't attack with might or magic, just with agility. They have 4, so they'll roll the d4. Now a tricky part here is that with the d4, they're actually pretty likely to hit me. Because they hit on max rolls, they have a 1 in 4 chance. But in this case, they rolled a 1, so they miss. I'll make another magic attack against their defense of 1, and I rolled a 6, so they're defeated. So I'll increase my dynamic die to 4, and combat is over. Now, if I did get my dynamic dice up to 6, I would place the die on my board here as a 1, which I could spend later to increase or decrease any roll by 1, whether it's my roll or my enemy's. When I spend it, I place it beside my board to indicate it's been spent. And whether or not I spent it, the next time I earn 6 experience, I get to place another dynamic dice out, but this time in the 2 spot, giving me 2 points to adjust rolls with. And if I get another 6 experience, I'll place one in the 3 spot, and so on and so forth. There's also one other way to modify your dice that I didn't cover. So let's say you're making a might attack against this group, and you need a 7 in order to hit. So you roll, and you come up short, in this case getting a 5. I can optionally lower the value of the stat I was using, in this case might, and increase my die roll by the same amount. So I would lower my might by 2 and increase my die roll by 2, giving me a 7 that I need in order to hit. And as a final step, I'm going to take this tile, place it back on the board upright, and move my character onto it, ending my turn. Die in the Dungeon is an interesting game with great artwork and production quality. I love the aesthetic they have going on here. The little Dominions are adorable, and they found a novel way to integrate dice and dice puns throughout the entire game. The components are also really great. The acrylic standees are a different take and lend an impressive look to the game. It's unique and a nice change from minis. The designer of this game, Wesley Woodbury, is local to me. I met him at our local convention, FallCon, back in 2018, and he's super passionate about board games. Hopefully he'll continue to make more under his Fundamental Games label. I know he has a Kickstarter coming probably in like a couple months here, and he's also got 2 YouTube channels, which I've linked in the description below, that you should definitely check out. Unfortunately, that's where the good news ends. This is a game I wanted to love, but couldn't. It's really great that you get all these characters, a background story, a bunch of scenarios, and rules for modular setup. Unfortunately, all of that is adding onto a framework that has some big flaws. The first problem is that it's just a bit fiddly. This is a light game, it's supposed to play in 30 minutes, but you're constantly searching for the correct dice to use, flipping and adjusting the tiles, and it's really easy to forget to adjust your time, ability power, the dynamic dice, all the stuff you do every turn. There's also just a multitude of small problems that add up as you play. It's largely a single-player game, just barely including the components for 2 players, and the rules for multiplayer feel pretty bolted on. The tokens, while beautiful, are slippery and are super dark, making them really hard to read. Even though you don't have enough components to play with 4 players, you'll get 4 turn references, but no reference material for things like tokens or edge cases in combat. None of these are individually a deal breaker, but they add up, and each feels like an obvious miss that's apparent on the first play. Problem 2 is that most of the game is spent rolling dice, and I know that sounds silly because it's a dice chucker, but the problem is that there's just a couple really weird things about the way dice are resolved that you encounter all the time. The main one is that difficulty scales really poorly. Let's say you're being attacked by a bunch of fighters, and you have a might of 11. If they have a combined might of 12, they can only hit you by rolling a 12, so they have about an 8% chance. Now imagine there was also a cleric in that party. They are incrementally stronger, but suddenly they're rolling a d20 and are about 5 times more likely to hit you. And then this happens on the lower end too, where enemies actually get more difficult as you eliminate them. Looking at that same combat example, initially you had a 45% chance of being hit. So you eliminate the cleric, and now they're rolling a d12, and it's an 8% chance. That's a huge drop. You eliminate one more fighter, and now they're rolling a d8. Now they obviously can't exceed your might of 11 with a maximum roll of 8, but max rolls always hit, and that's the problem. So now they have a 1 in 8 chance of hitting you, or about 12%. So 2 fighters are actually more likely to hit you than 3. And if you eliminate one more, now they're rolling a d4 and it's a 25% chance, so it increased again. This feels bad, and it leads to situations where you make bad choices. The best situation for you is that your opponent is rolling as large of a die as possible that doesn't exceed your defense. So if you have a modest defense of 8 and are choosing between eliminating a fighter or a wizard, it's better to eliminate the fighter. Even though he's weaker and should present less of a threat, he's actually more likely to hit you because he's rolling a d4 while the wizard is rolling a d6. Neither will hit you unless they do a max roll, and a max roll is more likely with the smaller die. This makes it feel like there's a distinctly optimal way to play, and one that's at odds with the narrative. It wouldn't be a problem if you encountered it occasionally, but it happens in most fights. The final problem is progression. With a modular setup and a big dungeon, I should have lots of options of how to move about and what to explore. Except I don't. Other than pursuing a particular token, all of the encounters and rewards are random. So I largely can't try to improve my character in any particular way. And even if I could, gaining a particular stat may or may not be useful due to the random nature of the encounters. With the time limit, I have to choose a fairly direct path in order to complete my objective, so most of the dungeon goes unexplored. I have a bunch of abilities, but they are pretty niche. The character fantasy is that you're a powerful monster with unique abilities that you're waiting to unleash. But it feels more like you have a bunch of situational abilities and you're waiting for the stars to align so that they might be useful. The result of all of this is that the experience feels monotonous. You spend a bunch of time building a dungeon, customizing a character, and then it doesn't really matter because your path is fairly self-evident. There's an optimal way to resolve encounters, you rarely get to use your abilities, and it really just feels a bit samey and random. And to be clear, randomness is okay. I'm okay with the idea of just taking a hero, entering the dungeon, chucking some dice, and seeing what happens. The problem here is the illusion of choice and the time investment. If this was a 20 to 30 minute game, it might be a different story, but most scenarios are probably going to take 5 to 10 minutes to set up and maybe 60 minutes to play. You can choose the die roller, Troll of Bones, the Diamond, whatever character you like. You can set them up however you like, but the experience will feel really similar anyway, which is a real shame. This is a bit of a tough game to recommend. If you love the art style and want to support fundamental games and smaller creators, definitely consider checking this one out. If you really love just jumping in randomly to a dungeon and seeing what happens, there's plenty of that here, just know that it has some definite rough edges. And I would say if you're looking for character progression, deep tactical choices, or are in any way opposed to randomness, look elsewhere. I really, genuinely hope we see an expansion or even just some revised rules that can help this game fulfill its potential. Because as it stands right now, there's a ton here and it just doesn't quite work. See you next time.